Hey, how you doing? This is Mike Lloyd with 41 Digital, and today's episode is brought to you by Manual Settings. First of all, before I get into anything, I just want to say I'm sorry. I know it's been a while since I've posted a video. I've been super busy. I've had other projects I've been working on and stuff, but I'm going to try to get better. I'm going to buckle down and try to get out as many as I can. With that said, I was literally writing a list of the different videos I wanted to create, and I got to thinking, well, hell, what if half the people don't even know what I'm talking about when I'm talking about, changing my settings? And I thought I would create a video to kind of take it back to the basics and help all of you scared people that won't get off of auto. You need to get off of auto. You have to. I'm going to try to, I don't want to say dumb this down, but I'm going to try to make this as easy as possible and help you switch from auto to full manual and create a lot better images. There's three things you need to worry about when you are going to full manual. That's ISO, that's your aperture, and your shutter speed. So these three things help your exposure, but they also have a side effect. You have to keep that in mind. It helps your exposure bring in more light, but it also changes other things in your image. I'm going to start with ISO. So to me, ISO is fake light. It technically is the adjustment of the sensor in your camera, but I just think of it as fake light. You can add fake light to an image. If you are taking a shot that it's starting to get dusk and you need to bump up your exposure somehow, you can add ISO to it. It's fake light, but it also introduces grain. Now, a lot of these newer cameras are getting better with it, but the more ISO that you use, the more fake light you use, the more grain that's introduced into your photo. You have to remember that. The second thing is aperture. Now, aperture is the iris inside your lens. It opens, it closes. When it's open, it's letting more light in. When it's closed, it's letting less light in. The measurement in which they measure the size of that aperture is what we refer to as f-stop. Why it's f-stop, I don't know, but it just is. So f-stop, and I'm sure you've heard people talk about the f-stop, is literally the size of the hole through your aperture. The more open, the lower the number. The smaller, the higher the number. You can go to a 2.8 aperture, you can shrink it down to an f22 aperture. More light, less light, but that also creates and it changes your depth of field. A more open aperture makes for a shallow depth of field. Now, depth of field is the distance or the amount that is in focus in your shot. I'm sure you've seen shots where, like a product shot, where just a part of it's in focus and the rest is out of focus. That's depth of field. That's an open aperture. It's letting more light in, but the side effect to that is a shallower depth of field. Now reverse that, when you shrink that down to say like an f16, it opens up that depth of field, but you're getting less light in. Now with that said, let me grab this. Different lenses have different f-stops. Like for instance, I have a Tamron 70-200. It says right here f2.8. So that is the largest that will open up. I also have a Nikon. That's a Nikon. It's an 85mm, and it's an f1.8. That's the widest that it will open. Some will shrink down to an f22, an f18. Those kind of vary. Some lenses, some telephoto lenses, you'll look at it and say, like the lens that I'm using to film right now, it's a Tamron 17-35. It's an f2.8 to 4. What that means is at 17 mil, it's a 2.8. When you zoom in to 35, it literally shrinks down to an f4. and that's the widest it goes. So it moves when you zoom in and out. Be aware of that. Before I get to that, I have a couple of examples of the shallow depth of field. I took 2 photos of a drone. The first photo was with my Nikon 85mm, and it was at 1.8, and you can tell that just a small portion of that drone is in focus. The next shot is I cranked that down to an I believe it was an f12, and you can tell that more of that drone is in focus. So that's your depth of field. So if you need more light, you can open it, but just don't forget it adjusts or it changes your depth of field. If you want a really cool, shallow depth of field shot, but that's going to bring in too much light, there's other things you can do to help that with, like your ISO. Make sure your ISO's down, and then also your shutter speed, which is number 3, your shutter speed. Shutter speed is just that. It is the speed of your shutter. So inside your camera, you have your sensor, and I'm specifically talking about DSLRs right now. You have your shutter, and in front of that, you have, it's a mirror. The shutter speed is the amount of time in seconds that shutter is open. A fast shutter speed will say 1/3000th of a second holds that shutter open for 1/3000th of a second. You can slow that down to 5, 10, even 30 seconds. So that means that shutter is literally open for 30 seconds. What that does is, the longer the shutter's open, the more light that is being absorbed into the sensor. If you need more light, you can slow down your shutter. But the side effect to that is what we call motion blur. If you have, say you're taking a photo of a subject, it's a bird, let's say it's a bird. We're taking a photo of a bird, it's in flight, your focus is on, you take a shot, and it's your shutter speed is set at, say, 1/3000th of a second. You're going to capture that bird perfectly in flight with no blur, no nothing. You can see every feather. It's crisp, it's clear, and it's gorgeous. If you slowed that down to, say, 1/20th of a second, you took that same photo of that same bird, that bird's going to be blurry, because when that shutter is open, your sensor is collecting all the data from that entire time it's open. So if the bird's flapping its wings and it has one full flap in there while your shutter is open, it's going to create that blur of the wings flapping. So take, for example, I have 2 photos here of cars. I went to it was kind of a car show, but it was more of the cars were just driving up and down the street. So this first shot, I believe I was 1/1200th of a second. So this car literally looks like it's parked in the street. There's no blur, no nothing. It's just sitting there. Everything is in focus, it's crisp, it's a clean shot. Now the second photo, I was 1/20th of a second. I have the subject in focus, and he's clear, but everything around it is blurry. And in a different video, I'll kind of show you how I did that. But all that blurry stuff is motion blur. So you can adjust that to gain more light. And also, if you want a blur in it, you can create that. So with these settings, your ISO, your aperture, your shutter speed, you have to use all 3 of them to create the image you want. If you need more light, you can adjust the ISO, you can adjust your aperture, and you can adjust your shutter speed, but remember the side effects to these. More grain, your depth of field changes, motion blur. So if you can get that in your head, if you want say you want to take a photo of a waterfall, but you want that kind of a silky smooth look to it that you've seen on Instagram and all over the place. You have to remember, okay, I want the motion blur in the water, but I have to worry about the light. So you can open up your sensor or open up your shutter for more time to get that motion blur of the water. But remember, all that light's coming in. So you're gonna have to make sure your ISO's down, and you're gonna have to probably shrink up your aperture. If it's in midday and it's a long shutter speed that you want, you're gonna probably have to get into ND filters and stuff. And I'm gonna talk about that in a whole different video because I don't want this to get too long and too complicated. So that's kind of the basics of manual. You want exposure, you want light, you want to create a beautiful photo, but you have to learn how all these settings affect the shot and how to manipulate different things. It's kind of hard to explain, but when all three of these work together, you can create some beautiful images. And that's what I want you to do. I want you to tell the camera what kind of shot that you want. I don't want the camera to tell you what kind of shot you're gonna get. That's the whole auto thing. You throw it in auto and the camera is literally gonna just give you what it wants to give you. You need to go to manual and tell that camera what you want, what kind of image you want. And we'll get in more of this in different videos with when I'm going to try to create one that talks a lot about how to get nice motion blur, and we will talk about the settings and stuff. But for now, I'm trying to keep it simple. I'm trying to kind of help guide you in a way, help give you enough confidence to switch to manual. Because once you do, you're going to become a much, much better photographer. And if you think about it, there are only gigs inside your camera. It goes on an SD card. If you don't like it, you can delete it. You don't have to get it developed. You just delete it. You don't like it, delete it. So with that said, I'm really hoping that this helps you. I hope that it kind of pushed you a little bit to dive more into manual, figure out your camera a little more. And if it didn't help you, I'm sorry. I'm trying. I tried to explain it. It's kind of complicated. I shouldn't say it's complicated. It's kind of confusing. It's really not too complicated. It's just more confusing, especially for me to try to explain it on a camera. Yeah, I'm not the best, and hopefully I got it across. But anyway, so yeah, if you liked it, please hit the like. I would also like to ask you to please subscribe if you would like to. You don't have to, but it'd be pretty cool. And until next time, get out there, learn your camera. Just got to do it. See ya.